Hey everybody, Mr. O'Donnell here. Hey, um, sorry I'm unable to be there today. I'll be at a conference, and so I wanted to be able to walk you through um, the last part of chapter 23. And then to best do so, I thought I would just make one of these little videos so you get to sit back basically and just watch me teach. So isn't that fun? Anyway, I wanted to talk about the Russian Revolution, and so sit back. If you would, please take out your notes and kind of follow along with some of the things like we would do during, let's say, like a normal lecture. So, Russian Revolution, you can see here the symbol of the Russian Revolution is that hammer. Sorry, is the hammer and the sickle. And that hammer and sickle are going to be a key component to basically what this event is. And what we've seen here in the last unit, we didn't spend much time talking about it, but it responds to those revolutions of capitalism and such in the Industrial Revolution, really being about some social problems like we saw in that when we analyzed that picture of the strike. And so what the Russian Revolution is more than any other place, it's the first and the biggest revolution that really sort of brought about what socialism is beyond a theory of Karl Marx into something that is a real viable um, political and economic system, and Russia is going to try that out. So, but let's go back a little bit and take a look at what life was like beforehand. This is titled "Life of Prosperity." What life was like in Russia was it a prosperous time period? Well, for the Tsar, yes. The Tsar definitely, and the nobility, going back to the ancient ways, the feudal system of Russia. And if you remember, even Peter the Great and Catherine wanted to be able to pull Russia out of that older system in which that much of Europe had already done, but Russia had struggled with that. So, um, so the um, um, the social and political system that ultimately is going to keep Russia in this particular way, I think, could be best represented in the next image, that forced labor system. But looking at this image, I think we saw one similar to this when we saw that family portrait last time, when you can see that Queen Victoria with her granddaughter Alexandra, really showing the connectedness of all those monarchs of Europe. But going back to here, that forced labor system, of course, is this. And here's a great image really demonstrating what this looks like. Most of the people in Russia lived this toiled in these feudal-like systems of serfdom, still dominated the makeup of Russia, and had for a long, long time. Like I said before, it was much farther behind the West in industry and social reforms. So now what's interesting is that we have the Russian Revolution, or the Socialist Revolution, happen in Russia first. But it's interesting is that Karl Marx believed in having a revolution, but that revolution that he envisioned, the first communist revolution, or all of them actually, he envisioned would happen in an industrialized society, right here, an industrialized society. What's odd is that it happens in Russia, not in the places that Marx would have really sort of thought it would have, which would have been Britain or Germany, the most industrialized nations. And the simple reason for that, to keep this in mind, is right here: the people were ready for change. We saw issues in Germany and France and Britain and the rest of Europe, but not like the conditions that we saw here in Russia. So these people were ready for some social change. Were they necessarily ready for Marxist style socialism? And the answer to that is going to be no. So we're going to see a different version of that, of what we'll get to later with Vladimir Lenin. So the Romanov, one of the more uh, famous stories in Russian history is the Romanov dynasty. We talked about Nicholas and his marrying of his wife. He gets the job of being a czar quite young. He'll go down in history as a family man, but not necessarily the most competent of leaders in Russian history. Really kind of unwilling to be a czar, and like this quote down here, it's a job I've feared my entire life. The first job of any royal family is, if you're going to be royal, you need to be able to pass the lineage on. And so the famous story of the Romanovs, of course, go to the family line. So Nicholas Romanov and his wife have a child, and you saw that one before, that they took to the grandmother Victoria, and they have a daughter. And unfortunately, you need to have a male heir to pass that on. So what's interesting in the Romanovs is they have another child, then they'll have another child, and they keep trying to have children in order to get to that male heir, and they struggle, so they have another child. So what do you do after 4 kids? Do you stop? Well, no, they go for one more, and look at that, there you go. So after on their fifth chance, they do have the next heir of the Russian dynasty. Alexei will be his name, and his story is an interesting one that will tie into part of the downfall of the Romanovs altogether. So in the story of World War One, Russia joins the war, like you can see here, unwillingly, which means that they were pushed into this by that system of alliances, that triple entente. They were very behind the rest of the European powers. Nicholas did not want to be able to go to war, and if you can see in this map here, and I think we had a quiz question on this as well, is that this line here, the battles that we see, is very much different from what we'll see in the Western Empire. Is that you're going to have this be very fluid and moving because you don't have the industrialized kind of conflict, because Russia lacked that, and so we won't see the trench warfare like you do in the Western Front. Um, Partly due to the fact that you're going to have ultimately huge casualties as well. Um, Lots of people deserting. I think that the number is about 3.3 million people, Russians, are going to die in the conflict and have one of the largest number of casualties there. Nicholas sees that things are falling apart, people are deserting and leaving, and so he's ultimately makes a decision that he needs to take direct command of the army, not necessarily making the day-to-day decisions, but try to be able to be an inspiration to the troops on the front. And he leaves Russia at home in the hands of his wife, which is going to be interesting because how is she and what's left of his advisors there going to deal with the issues at home? We call that domestic issues. Well, some of the issues at home were, first off, not many Russians wanted to be in a war that they didn't feel that there was a need for, and then they start to see the huge, um, lots of people dying, and their sons dying, and fathers and husbands and so forth. And so the issues at home start to become, the war will expand, or will um, uh, the war will make all of the issues that are already there much worse, like food shortages and oppression of lower classes, the failure of any representation of within the government, and so all of this is going to come into play. Um, and like we see, if you can remember this, we often see this revolutions come about, much like that mandate of heaven we've seen throughout China and other revolutions, is when what gets the people motivated, when people will get motivated, particularly more than anything else, is when their day-to-day life struggles, and that usually involves food. We see it in China oftentimes with natural disasters, but here we have food shortages and people pick up. Look at rock picking up again, going back to the idea of the strike that we saw. And so there's a lot of interest in talks by socialist leaders like Karl Marx. Now, with that being said, most of the general Russian population have not read Karl Marx, and trust me, I decided to not have you guys read it in class because it is a dense, hard to follow philosophy on socialism. Um, but there are Russian leaders who are going to be able to take and modify those ideas. What do common people want? French revolutions and Chinese revolutions. They want a stable life and somebody who's going to be able to promise change. And so that's what ultimately was going to happen. Let's jump back forward. Here we can see Nicholas, and his son has gotten a little bit older. And the issue with Alexei, and we'll go over this just briefly though, is that he is the heir to the throne, but let me go back. He struggles with hemophilia. Hemophilia, the disease, and I think many of you probably know the story, is that your blood does not clot. Well, the royal family wanted to hide this from everybody because they felt that this was a sign of a weakness, and also of a flaw in the monarchy. So they wanted to be able to hide his illness, and then from his illness, the problem though is that you can see a boy of his age. This boy is going to bleed with basic, cuts and scrapes and even bruises, which is bleeding under the skin. So the Romanovs were very concerned about their son, who suffered from these, excruciating and painful things. And so one day we have this man show up, and this is one of the more interesting characters in all of history, and his name is Rasputin. Very well known, sort of a mythical following he has today in terms of his, I don't want to say popularity, but his um, uh, People find him an interesting character in history. He is a monk with a lot of interesting non-monk-like characteristics. Um, he seems to be the only person to really be able to soothe Alexei from his pains. He's able to use hypnosis and other techniques to try to be able to get him to feel better temporarily. The mother, Alexandra, was going to want him around all the time. The problem then is that as when Nicholas is gone, Rasputin is going to be around and starts to get his hand and into more political matters, and has a very close relationship with the wife. He has a very scandalous personal life about, like I said, a lot of adult style entertainment, if you understand what I'm talking about. But many of the Russian people were concerned, and they wondered who this guy is. Like, take this poster cartoon of the day in Russian, and we can see there's Romanov with his mad eyes. Um, Looks like he is really the one controlling the Tsar and the Tsarina. So he does give advice to her, and um, we never necessarily see of a love affair between them, although it's insinuated by people. But many people within the Russian court, that aristocracy, those former boyars and such, feel that many of Russia's problems could be fixed if if Rasputin is taken care of. So at this particular part, I'd like for us to take a moment, and we're going to watch the video about what happened, because they decided to get rid of Rasputin, but it's not as easy as that. So we'll take a pause here and watch the video.